Hello, 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 New Haven, and welcome back to Arts Respond on WNHHLP 103.5 FM, New Haven. I'm your host, Lucy Gellman, and today I am here with Jacob Smith, Gina Nicole Blifford, and Marty Tucker. Sorry, Marty Tucker. I don't know why I added a D to your last name.
Okay.
You've got a great last name just as it is, Marty Tucker of New Haven Theater Company, and we are talking about The Christians by Lucas Neath. If you find yourself asking, what is The Christians? That's a great question. That's why we're all here today. So it is a show by Lucas Neath. I believe it premiered 10 years ago this year, but I could be wrong about that. And it is a show that goes inside a church, a large church, and really explores a schism that happens within this house of worship. New Haven Theater Company is bringing the show to New Haven starting next Thursday, February 27th, and it runs, I believe, Thursdays through, I'm pulling up my ticket link right now, Thursdays through Saturdays, the 27th, 28th, and March 1st, and then again, March 6th, 7th, and 8th. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for being here on this very, it's sunny, but it's a very cold Friday if folks are listening from Connecticut. So I hope all of you are cozy in your respective spaces. So I want to jump right into it. And first of all, and maybe this question is for Jacob. I feel like you're kind of the keeper of the knowledge. For listeners who maybe are not super familiar with New Haven Theater Company, can you just talk a little bit about what it is and the work that y'all do in New Haven, really in the heart of the city at EBM Vintage, which is downtown?
Sure. And just to correct you, Lucy, I'm not the keeper of the knowledge. I'm just the keeper of the big mouth. So
big mouth knowledge. I don't know.
Yeah. The New Haven Theater Company has been around for a long, long time. And if there was ever anyone who wanted to be a historian and go back and build our history, they would probably be going back several decades. Everybody in town has some story about one time or another being connected to New Haven Theater Company, it seems. This particular iteration started about 13, 14 years ago. And it was a theater company that basically got passed to us, those of us who are in it now, from the person who previously literally owned it as an asset. He was the owner of the company. It was a for-profit entity. We then converted it into a not-for-profit and have been operating it that way ever since. And we established some bylaws early on that said that the artistic decisions of the company are not made by a play reading committee who then comes and says this is what we'll be doing in the next season, or by an artistic director who determines what they're going to do based on that particular person's vision. But as a collective and as an ensemble, we decide what we're going to do together in a collaborative process that happens usually over the summer, where we read a bunch of plays together. We don't really actually read them together. We read them and get together and talk about them. And in the process, we then decide as a group, by unanimous consent, what shows we're going to do each year. The mission of the company is to tell great stories. And this is something that we have been doing for the last 12, 13 years. It is something that this very much character-driven, dialogue-driven work. We don't do a lot of spectacle. We don't do any musicals. We only do straight plays in the theater term for what that means, meaning dramas and comedies. And we really are very much about the telling a great story in all the work that we do, and I think certainly this play fits that bill.
And I'm also wondering if we can talk about, for folks who maybe don't know, so Lucas Neath is, I feel like, I don't know if the moment is actually over, but I feel like he had a moment a couple years ago, maybe he's still in that moment, where like everyone was doing Lucas Neath. It was just like the cool thing to do.
Yeah, Lucas Neath, his moment that you refer to is that moment of A Doll's House Part Two. And that was the show that was the first production of his. Well, actually, it wasn't the first production of his. It's the second production of his that went to Broadway. His first one was Hillary and Clinton, which was a story kind of about Bill and Hillary. But the the show went to Broadway. It got nominated for Tony Awards. It got a lot of coverage and won a Tony Award for Best Actress. And the show got done quite a bit regionally once it stopped its run on Broadway. And that's probably the experience people had of Lucas Nave.
Including at Longworth Theater here in New Haven.
Yeah. So that show kind of catapulted him, but he's got other really, really interesting and good plays. New Haven Theater Company did one several years ago with the long and complex title of A Staged Reading of an Unproduced Screenplay About the Death of Walt Disney.
Yes, I remember this. Yes.
Yeah. And that show, it was a show that we really, it appealed to us as a company. We thought it told a great story. It was all about character. And it was a lot of fun to do. So we're revisiting him with this play, which is one that was written shortly before the Disney play.
So let's talk about the Christians and why it felt like a good fit for New Haven Theater Company. Yeah, let's start there. And I will say when I was lucky enough to go to a rehearsal. If you're listening to this live, we're on Friday. Last night was Thursday. I had to do some reporter math to get there, but I was lucky enough to go to a rehearsal and see some of this. I don't know how many spoilers we want to share, but when I was watching it, one of the things I was struck by is it in so many ways feels like a fictionalized account of the lives of so many faith leaders, including Reverend Carlton Pearson, maybe most prominently, who was an advisor to multiple presidents and then had a revelation of his own. I don't know how many spoilers we want to give away or not give away.
Well, it's funny. Nath talks about him as being the one that people tend to think about when they see the play.
And yet there were several, I know I've listened to interviews with Lucas Nath, and he says, yeah, Pearson was one of these guys, but actually there were a lot of people who had sort of a crisis of faith or a pivot in faith, if we want to frame it that way. And sometimes it's on a huge doctrinal thing, like the existence of heaven or hell, for instance. And sometimes maybe it's in something very, very small or a difference between denominations. So, why was this a good play in this moment to bring to New Haven Theater Company?
I mean, I personally think it's because of what Jake have said in the way that we operate, that we are always looking for character-driven pieces. And it's funny, I think we talked with you about it last night about wanting to do a political season, which, sorry, Jake, everyone was just a little bit afraid of that. Obviously now we know for very good reason. But this still, to your point, Lucy, earlier, that it still is somewhat political because religion winds up being political. But it's thoughtful, it's provocative. And I know those are like just kind of like cliche words for theater, but it's things that we like to do. Like mainly for me, being in production, yes, performances are great. And, as a performer, sometimes myself, but to me, the best part of the process is the rehearsal process, is being in conversation with these people who I like trust and, just look up to and like always value their opinions. And we get to sit and be in conversation with this. And it always applies to, that's why people go to theater, right? Because it always applies to something in your life, something that's going on. And I told you last night that when I first read the script and Jake and Steve Scarpa were like, oh, this would be great, you should direct this. And I was like, oh, I don't think so. I don't think that's a right fit for me. But in reading it, I was like, it is, because it's a challenge, and I like to challenge myself. and it's kind of always fun to go outside of my comfort zone, but it was an excellent vehicle for our company members, and it is something that there's also like this sense of hope in it, that, and again, I'm trying to like word this without causing too, like, I want people to um we said this last night, I want people to go in without having like expectations. Like, it is one of those moments of like evenings of theater that you should just go in and don't try to expect anything, because I think it will really surprise people to see how Nath talks about religion without like talking about religion, right?
Yeah, and I want to ask all of you, is this moment one in which religion feels kind of sticky, even and especially when I think a script is nuanced and really thoughtful about how it's presenting it. There, like, the country is a wild place right now, right? And I think my mother-in-law and I talk all the time about how Jesus Christ would be really disappointed, extremely disappointed in how his name is often being invoked in this moment. And or is, if that's your belief system, very disappointed. And so does this feel sticky and or more important than ever to bring to the stage?
Yes, and yes, and right. It's but again, I think that's why we all do theater, because it brings those things up. It brings them to the surface. It's kind of like the whole point of with the last 10 years of people saying that they don't see color. Well, I'm sorry, just because you say something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I mean, that's the same with religion. It can be sticky and it can be a difficult thing to talk about, but that doesn't mean that people aren't feeling those things and that they don't live in those lives. And yeah, for me, it's very sticky. But that's one of the reasons I want to do it, because it's an ability to present something and to kind of defy people's expectations and what they think like a conversation about religion can be. And it also helps, I think people are starting, and I do the same thing sometimes too, is having these like raw kind of conversations with people is becoming increasingly difficult. And it's like, for me, and I think for us in these rehearsals and presenting it, it kind of like flexes that muscle, right? Of being able to have like good, clear conversations, learning something about yourself and like also probably about the topic that you're talking about. So
What makes it less sticky for me is that it's very even-handed in how it's written and how it's presented. When I first was told, "Hey, we'd like you to play this role in The Christians," and I looked at the cover of the script and I thought, "Oh, this is a playwright who's going to bash Christianity." That was my prejudice walking in, that I assumed that this playwright was going to attack something, and I wasn't really interested in doing that. But as I read it, it's not that at all. It's that each person, each character that we meet has a strong faith, and it's important to them. And they just happen to have different ideas about how to practice and live out that faith. And so you don't have to be religious or anti-religious or anything to get a lot out of this play, I don't think. I think you can come and I think that at moments you're going to side with Pastor Paul, which is my character, and think, "Oh, he's totally right. Oh, that's what a brave and wonderful point he's making." And then 5 minutes later, you're going to be like, "Well, no, I side with this person over here. I side with I side with the older woman who's a member of the church because she's making a good point." Oh, but Paul is also making a good. That's what's great about the script, is that there aren't these judgments. You're just being presented, and I think people from their various backgrounds and their various takes on religion are going to have various views of what they get out of the show. That's what I love about theater.
And I should say, while it is not an autobiographical show at all, Nath did grow up as a member of an Assemblies of God church in Orlando, which, like, to me, just sounds like multiple levels of things that make me uncomfortable. There's church, there's mega church, there's Florida, all those things. and in one place. But also, and Jacob, I'll toss it to you, but this question is for anyone. I think you brought up a point before we were on mic today that like this is a show that takes place in a church, yes, and it is certainly about faith. Like the core of this is about faith. But it's also about the really fickle nature of belief and believing itself, and the fact that that can be applied to a lot of situations. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I think that it kind of goes back to what Marty was saying, which is that um, there is there's this presentation of of each of the characters, which is incredibly even-handed, and in the process, um, you align yourself with them in the moment because there are great points being made, and they're all being very passionate about their beliefs. And as a result, you as an audience member are taken on this journey where you will go through a cycle of being up and down. And in fact, I'm interested in hearing from the people who do come into the play as an audience member with the kind of expectations that Marty had with the script, where they say, this is going to be a play about, being there's going to be a satire on Christianity, and people are going to, not be respectful of the subject matter. And I'm prepared to be, to bristle at that. I think those people I really want to talk to after the show, because I think they're the ones that are going to come out of it going, that was not at all what I was expecting.
So. I mean, we briefly, not joked, but we kind of were like, oh, maybe we should have talkbacks after. We don't usually, but I think it definitely is a performance and a play that lends itself to having it. Because I'm also like just incredibly curious to what people will have to say. And our audiences are great, so we could probably stick around in the store afterwards. And
Lucy, I don't know if I answered the question there or not that you
had. No, you totally did. And and I'm wondering also just how has the process in the rehearsal room, we're sort of peeling back these layers. I think people often walk into a show and the show is just there and they consume it, and maybe they have a talk back Dina and they think about it, and then they go home and they don't, it's sort of like an exhibition. You don't think about everything that's gone into selecting the work, the first read through, the rehearsals, the set, which I should say there's like a very, I think, intentionally pretty minimalist set for this show at EBM Vintage, which is on Chapel Street, and it works in this space that you've made into a black box theater, basically. So take me into that process and take our listeners just a little bit into that process.
I mean, I have to kick that off actually with these two, because they've introduced, the two of them, a different way of approaching the rehearsal process for the company over the course of the last 2 years. Marty directed Cried Out last year with a very different way. We typically do like a four days a week in the evenings, and we rehearse for 6 weeks and blah blah blah. That show, Cried Out, this show, The Christians, approached it very differently. So I'm going to let them I'll set them up for that conversation.
Would you like to take it, Marty?
Well, what we did with Cry It Out, when I decided to direct Cry It Out, I knew that Dina had to play the role that she played, and I knew that we wanted Jenny Shuck to play the opposite her, and both of them and all of us are extremely busy, and so I trusted them as actors, and we decided to create a really efficient rehearsal process wherein we worked early on, and then they had time to work themselves and to learn their lines and to learn about their characters, and then we came back periodically on weekends, and then really it came together very quickly. And when you have a company that you know and you can trust, and you trust the other people, and you already know a little bit how to work together, you can do something like that. So with this particular play, I joke I have more lines than Hamlet in this play. And I tried to come in mostly off book. I did come in off book for the first half of the play, and that was, I think helpful, because at least I was ready to go for that. And then our rehearsal could really be about rehearsing and not about trying to think of the next line. So that's how we've sort of morphed the traditional rehearsal process into something new that works really well for our company. And I'll toss it to Dina.
Yeah, and it's actually Steve Scarpa is directing the next show, Heisenberg, and that's a two-hander, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. And that they're also trying to follow the same model because it's really hard to get. I mean, Lucy, you and I were talking about it last night, like having a kid and not just kid, anyone without kids. Like Marty said, we're all busy. This is not our full-time job. We're all volunteers, and this is just something we love to do. And last year it worked so well that we were like, okay, let's try it again. And I would wholeheartedly agree with Marty that the bonus of it beyond like maximizing people's time is coming into rehearsal and everyone's so comfortable with the language already that we're able to like play more with the scenes and like just kind of it's just a little more freeing because we're able to like do the deep dives because we're not worried. The show's a little bit different too. There's not like really there's not, to Jacob's point, there's not a ton of spectacle. Like I think you saw last night, the blocking is pretty simplistic. There's not like props and like costume changes. It's actually like very, very simplistic. So that's also, we're fortunate in that regard, is that we've been able to again have like a 45-minute conversation and like deep dive before rehearsal, even like before anyone even steps on the stage, because we haven't had to like really focus on those technical parts quite as heavily.
And I should also say, all of you come to like faith and belief systems from different backgrounds, different lived experiences, right? And so I'm wondering, has this script been a chance for you to either think deeply about that, or wrestle with that, or maybe even challenge yourself, like, or I guess to make it more active? Like, do you feel like Lucas Nath has raised something that challenges you?
I mean, I'll speak for myself is that, I mean, I think I said last night that I was raised Catholic. I did First Communion and confirmation, and but my dad is Catholic and my mom is Jewish, but we grew up in a place where there was no synagogue. So I was raised in the religion of the parent that it was like they were more closely aligned with it. But never had like a strong connection to that religion or like to the community. So my thing, and like this has just kind of been overall, and this show just brings it back up, that there is a little bit of a like an ache of like, or just like I don't understand, and I'm kind of sometimes like, jealous is a bit of a strong word, but like I'm in awe of people's beliefs. Like that to me is just, it can be, and that's why I think the show is interesting, because like faith can be just, in any faith, like any religion can be so demonized, but then there is like such beauty in like the faith that some people have. It's incredible. And I don't have that in a religious sense. So that I always find that incredibly interesting and just wonderful that some people are able to have that in their lives.
And Jake, Kev, and I are both involved in our churches, not the same one, not the same denomination, but sort of based on our conversations, a little bit similar in our philosophy of welcoming all people. I think Jake Kev calls it an extravagant welcome.
Radical welcome, actually.
Radical welcome. We call it an extravagant welcome. We're open. My denomination is open and affirming, which some religious folks would be up in arms just about that mere fact. So what it has done for me, I've already gone through all of I'm 56 years old. I've already thought a lot about all of these questions all through my life and come to a very good place where I know what I believe. And I'm strong in that faith. And it's not terribly far away from Pastor Paul's new vision. It's not the exact same, but but I would understand why bringing this new idea that he brings, that he believes God has told him to bring this new message, this would shake the foundation of any of the mega churches, especially down south. This would be a radical change, which is what he calls it. And what's interesting is he presents this idea, the pastor presents this idea, and then every other scene is the pastor and one other person wrestling with what he's done. And he crumbles through the play. He gets beaten up pretty good, as you saw, Lucy, last night in rehearsal. He gets beaten up through the play, but he still has his faith. He still believes this is what's right and this is what he's going to stick with, even though he sees it causing problems within the church that is his livelihood and is what he has built from the ground up. So, but so it's not something that's made me suddenly think, oh, is my faith right? Or I've already been through that journey and still continue on it, but it didn't radically change the way I believe that God works.
One of the ways that it made me think more deeply about my experience with my congregation and my faith is that we build our lives around pillars of community, right? And for myself, and I'm sure also for Marty, that church community is one of those central pillars of our support system. And that gets talked about in the play in the really, really gripping way. And it's when you see it through the eyes of someone who feels that sense of community and belonging and family, and see that being potentially disrupted, that's very powerful and compelling, and touches me a great deal as we go through the rehearsal process with it.
I just want to remind folks that if you're just joining us or if you've been hanging out with us here, this is WNHHLP 103.5 FM New Haven. I'm your host, Lucy Gellman. This is Arts Respond, and I am here with Dina Nicole Blifford, Jacob Smith, and Marty Tucker, and we are talking about The Christians, which opens next week at New Haven Theater Company. That's at EBM Vintage downtown on Thursday, February 27th. And I will have Harry Droz, who is our wonderful, wonderful station manager, drop the ticket info and the website info in the chat under where this interview is showing up. So I also want to say, we've talked a little bit about this. Has this made you think deeply? Because I think sometimes religion, you can kind of be on autopilot. I don't know if you've ever felt it's like, okay, I'm gonna do this thing, I'm gonna say these prayers, I'm gonna go. I'm not a Christian, I'm Jewish, but I would say like ritual is extremely important to me, especially now that I have a young kid. And so, but sometimes I find like, oh, I don't want to feel like I'm checking a box. Like, okay, it's Friday night, I said that prayer. Woo, okay, candles are lit. Woo, I did that. Has this made you think differently about your own relationship with faith? And I would say, because this is a play in which I'll leave it broad and just say like the existence of heaven and hell is an important part of the play, and that is not true of all religions. This is a play that is specific to Christianity in a lot of ways. And so has it also changed, your relationship with faith and the way you're thinking or going back to thinking about Jesus Christ and about God?
I would say for me, it's a little less about those things, because again, I've been on that journey for a long time and think about those things all the time. For me, it's a bit of a reminder of what is church for? What is the purpose of that building? Is it to be closed off and to serve each other, or is it to reach out and help others in the world. And so it has made me look at my own church's outreach and mission projects, and what's the purpose of those? Is it to make us feel good, or is it to truly make a difference? So I don't think, again, I'm repeating myself a little bit. I don't think it's changed my personal faith, but it has made me re-examine what's important about what purpose the church serves. And and by the way, I do think it's a dual purpose. I think that you go to that building because you need to be fed, so that you can then take it outside and make a difference in the world. If either of those parts is lacking, then the whole thing's not working as well as it should. So that's what it has made me think about, is the purpose of church in general.
Yeah. For me, I would say it's a very similar situation to Marty's, in that it hasn't really changed my relationship to my faith. But I will say that there are some things in Christianity that tend to move towards a binary choice, right? And that sometimes people on opposite sides of that binary choice dismiss the other position as being untenable. And one of the great things about what Nath does is he shows you both sides of that binary choice, and gives you good reasons to consider both sides of that, and to weigh them in a way that maybe you haven't weighed them in a while. And that's, for me, has been helpful. It can either take you into another direction in terms of how you're considering that binary choice, or it can, strengthen the position that you have taken on the binary side of that choice. So, without giving away too much and being too much of a spoiler alert, I want to kind of try to keep it a little bit vague.
Yeah, well, I also want to ask, we talked a little bit about presenting this show in this current moment, and obviously when y'all were starting to talk about selections last June, you could not have known what the next months and year would hold. I don't think before January 20th, any of us actually knew what this year was going to hold, and it is evolving as we speak right now. But just thinking about that. But does it feel like you are also presenting the show, which is about breaking down binaries, in this moment when we are just increasingly polarized in everything, including faith?
I don't know that there is a play that wouldn't make me think about that, because that is everything right now. It's either this or it's this. You can't, there's no middle ground. And for me, that's what's wrong right now in our country. And I mean, not just now, I mean 4 years ago, 8 years ago, 12 years ago, that there's no sense that coming together and collaborating will make the best answer. It's if Kevin proposes it, then it's a terrible idea. Or if Dina proposes it, it might be a wonderful idea, but we won't allow ourselves. We've become a society, I think, that's very much binary, that can't accept two things. And I'm going to go all the way back to when the O.J. Simpson saga happened. It was hard for our country to say, yes, the police planted evidence, and yes, O.J. did it. If you believed that the police planted evidence, you couldn't believe O.J. did it. And if you believe O.J. did it, then the police couldn't have planted. Yes, both were probably likely true based on the evidence. But we are split right now. And so I can't imagine, I watch cartoons, I watch almost anything, and I think of how it applies to the state of our country. And again, I'm not necessarily blaming this current moment, because this has been building for a long time, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I would say at least in 1619, if not earlier than that.
Well, I mean, and that's something that I see too, is that it's we have a hard time being in conversation with other people that don't feel the same way that we do. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying to be in conversations where people's humanity and rights are not being taken into consideration and supported, but in having differing opinions and moving through the world in a different way. Like, I don't move through the world the same way that you do, even, Lucy. You know what I mean? Like, we're both women, like, we both have children. That's there's so much other in that.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes when things come to a head, it's like it's so hard to sit in that conversation and to like actually talk about it without taking it personally and the being offended, right? And that's there's a line, I don't want to give it away because it is like it's a through line in the show. But in our need to communicate, but like to actually sit in uncomfortable situations and like to have harder conversations, and to actually understand people and not just to flippantly say like, well, that's not what I believe, so I'm like, just that I'm going to put that over here, I'm going to compartmentalize that. Because again, like, we all come at this show from very different places, so I look at it in a very different way than Jacob and Marty do. So that's, I mean, that's where our curiosity of wanting to hear from people comes from. Because I mean, even if you go to the same church as someone, Marty's experience with the other congregants at his church is still, even sitting in that same building together every weekend, are still not going to be the same people with the same lived experiences.
And
So,
oh, sorry.
I was
no,
just
go
gonna say,
ahead.
Go
let's
ahead,
give away
Brian.
the line. Come on. I think that's a line that,
You want to? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I
Well,
say,
I will let you deliver it then, because
Pastor Paul says, I have a powerful urge to communicate with you, but I find the distance between us insurmountable.
yeah,
And that's what the play's about.
right.
Yeah, and have y'all found yourselves having either more of those uncomfortable conversations? Because I think, and so many theater makers in our community have brought this up, that we enter a room as strangers and we share this common experience of witnessing and being part of a story, listening to a story. And we take something away from that and leave as people who understand each other a little bit better. And yes, that is super Pollyanna. I am sure that I have walked into plays with people who do not hold the same set of opinions and beliefs as me. And when they leave, maybe they're voting for someone else. Maybe they're raising their child in a very different way. So yeah, maybe that's a little hopey changey. But has this inspired you, or for Marty and Jacob, does your faith sort of ground you in having these conversations? Because I would say that especially right now, I think it's on folks who have privilege, folks who are white, to hold many of these conversations, and folks who are cisgender, heterosexual, to hold that space for other people who maybe are at more marginalized intersections to not have to hold that weight.
Yeah, I think that the way that I approach that, Lucy, is making a safe space for people to be able to have their opinions and their points of view be heard. And I think that our storytelling does do that. I think that it's not so much about hoping to come out of that convincing someone to be different than the way they came in, but convincing someone to understand the lived experiences of other people better. One of the things that when Dina said earlier about the potential political season that we talked about it as a company, right? We said, and I brought this forward. I said, look, I think that it would be good for us to do a political season this year. And I made a passionate case, I think, about why I thought that was a good idea. And the people in the company allowed me to make that case and allowed me to express my passions about it. And then through the course of several meetings, we talked about why it would be good and why it would not be good. Right. And as Dina said earlier, we were concerned about doing it, but we were concerned about it more from the perspective of, one, people are going to be inundated with this in their lives every day. It is we can potentially serve people better by giving them a place to get away from that and escape from that. One of the reasons why we went with Dear Elizabeth as our first show, a story about a platonic relationship of 40 years between two poets from the mid-century of the 1900s. And it's a wonderful, wonderful play about a relationship and how that relationship evolves. But we decided that giving people a place to not have to wrestle with that as they do in their outside life, and also that the plays that we do, that's not historically been our DNA. Our DNA has been about storytelling, character-driven dramas and comedies. It hasn't been a political thing, so it would step away from the DNA of the company. So as we had that very open and frank conversation, rather than putting the company to a vote on it, I said, no, I hear what people are saying, and we're going to step back from that, and I'm not going to put that forward as an option. Sorry.
Oh no, that's okay. My partner walked into the room and walked out. No, don't apologize. This community radio at its finest. Dina or Marty, hop in.
Well, I mean, again, like it's not part of our mission statement, but I mean, it's also doing theater and presenting stories and sharing, I think to your point, Lucy, sharing moments with people, like when audiences come in and we all share this event together. To me, that is right now, and working in small ways when I'm not in rehearsal and at work, but like that's resistance. And that is doing things that, nothing gets solved in a day. We like to have this like immediacy of everything. And that's when we talk about the distance in communication as well, right? Like we're all so connected and we're also so disconnected. But also, it's like building things better and making, hopefully opening people's minds and like introducing them to things that are other than themselves. That's all. It all happens in small steps. And like us putting this out there is like, I think for all of us in a little way is like our way to make things a little bit better, to talk about things that are a little bit difficult. And again, I understand that we're also talking about like a mega church and like cis white people. Like, that's the presentation of it. But that becomes 100 other conversations when people leave the theater, right? Like that morphs into something different. And to me, that's why theater is incredibly important, because it just continues on and it grows when the audience leaves our building. So.
Marty, hop in.
I know. I mean, Jake, Kev, and I were on opposite ends of the spectrum on that one. Jake Kev gave a very compelling and passionate argument as to why he felt that was something we should do. And it didn't matter for me who won the election. I didn't think I would want to sit through a play about politics in November. I thought I would be so just exhausted by it. That I would want to go to the theater, yes, to still think, yes, to still be challenged, but not about that right in my face. And so we shared that, and we had that open conversation. We're a good model for the microcosm of what the United States should be, to be able to have two different sides, to talk it through, and to come to a consensus that, you know what, there are some good ideas in that plan, but as an overall plan, this is not good for us moving forward. That's what we're not doing as a country right now. And again, not just right now, but for a while. And until we do that, I don't see us moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No,
Please.
but but what has come out of it is a season has some variety, that is still compelling, that is still allowing the audience to think and be challenged, but also to just escape for a few minutes from watching 24 hours news cycle.
I
It's,
also
yeah.
feel like we're living in this moment where faith is inherently political, but it shouldn't be, as are so many things. Um, I know plenty of people will disagree with me on this, but I think Jesus was a pretty radical dude, right? He advocated for sex workers. He was pro-immigrant. He would not have been anti-choice, in my humble opinion. So it's interesting to think about this show as both providing a sanctuary and providing a space to a sanctuary in the literal sense. It takes place in a church, but also a sanctuary in the sense of like you walk into a theater and you're transported into a different place. But also a space to think, I think, much more deeply than even though I am a member of the media, I would say then the mainstream media often is depicting faith and conflicts therein. So I do want to ask, just before we wrap up, all of you are incredibly busy people. You're doing this, Marty and Dina, as you mentioned, on a voluntary basis. How do you also take care of yourselves?
Well, I mean, part of it is this gives us something. It's what I said before about church. It feeds us at the same time we're trying to feed others. You know, there are nights when I go, oh, I have to go to rehearsal in a cold theater, and I'm putting on my long johns to go inside of a building, and I'm going, well, is this where? And then you get on stage and you interact with the other characters and the other actors, and all of a sudden the whole play's over, and I go, oh, that was quick, because it fills me. It fills me to do this. That's why we have this company, because it fills us, and we hope that it fills our audience too, and it fills New Haven with a little bit of culture, and so it's a symbiotic relationship. It's a two-way street. So that's what gets me going, and that's what gets me excited about doing it.
1,000,000% that. And also just my family. I said I was out of pocket. I have an 8-year-old, so I was out of pocket for quite a few years. And my husband worked nights and weekends, and I was like, I can't. I'll come like work front of house, and I did some marketing stuff on the side, but in coming back to it, my husband even said, he's like, you need something for yourself. And like I think that's everyone has their thing, but nothing happens in a vacuum, right? Like no one. I said it, I think to Babs the other day, I said, like, we have this, and it's like ingrained into us, this, what is it called? Rugged individualism, that like you can do this thing on your own. And that's the like amazing thing. And I think also, I'll speak for myself, but I think in working with these fine people for many years, that part of what we love is the collaboration, right? Is this like coming into a room and making a thing? Like I know sometimes the director too, everyone's like, we were talking about something the other night, they're like, oh, well, you need to make that decision. I'm like, no, I don't. I was like, we can make that decision together, because I want this to be a collaborative process. I don't like own the full vision of this thing. Like I'm there to help, to guide it, but we do it all together. And that works the same way of how I'm able to do this, period, is that my husband and my child are incredibly understanding, and my husband's been food prepping for me, so I can literally like run in the house and like eat good food too, and then like run out. It takes everyone, right? It literally does take a village, and we have a really nice village. So
Jacob, bring us home.
Well, I'll take us back to the thing I said about the faith community being one of the pillars of our we create little pillars that help support us in our daily lives. I think for me and for all of us, the theater is one of those pillars, right? Just as the church is for Marty and I is one of those pillars. So the theater community, our theater company, the broader theater community, the broader arts community, and then the audience as well, represent one of those really, really important pillars in my life that helps feed me to want to come back in that cold theater every night and we're there and rehearse.
Yeah, if you're coming, please just dress warm.
Yeah, you may want to wear your coat, having been in there.
Yeah. Yes.
We have the best theater lobby in the state of Connecticut, but it's also one of the colder ones in the state of Connecticut.
You know what? That's okay. People make theater, as I think as creatives, folks like cobble and they figure it out and they problem solve. And this is definitely an example. And we'll have you back on when we have, I don't know, like a series about just the lack of spaces that creatives can use in New Haven, because that is a real problem, but that's for another episode. So if you've been hanging out with us here, or if you're just joining us, this is Arts Respond on WNHHLP 103.5 FM New Haven. I've been your host, Lucy Gellman. If you just tuned in, please go back and listen to the full episode. It will be available on many, many platforms, and it's well worth listening to, whether or not you consider yourself to have any relationship with faith or theater. Please take a chance on The Christians by Lucas Neath. It is showing starting next week on February 27th. That's a Thursday, through New Haven Theater Company, which performs at EBM Vintage, which is 839 Chapel Street in New Haven, downtown New Haven, Connecticut. I want to thank Dina Nicole Blifford, Jacob Smith, and Marty Tucker for joining me on this episode. And hopefully, if you're listening, you love theater and you don't need convincing. But if you need convincing, go to the show. That's me. I deal in objective facts. I'm telling you to go to the show. Throw some money at theater makers. It's a good day to do so, or a good week to do so, whatever. And experience this work. I think it's well worth experiencing. And I will say, and Marty mentioned this earlier, it is a show that moves very quickly. So even if you're worried about being stuck in a theater space, which you shouldn't be worried about, go to the show. Thank you all so much. And thank you, as always, to Harry Droz. He's the man behind the magic, and he makes our work at WNHH possible. Thank you, Harry. Have a good weekend, y'all.
Thanks, Lucy.
Thanks, Lucy.
Thank you.